another episode of Inspirational Journeys of the Best Minds. I'm your host, Ria, and today we have a very special guest joining us. Someone who's a true embodiment of leadership and who exemplifies leading a team to victory through both words and actions. Simon Clarke, a managing director at Citi Private Bank, has close to 4 decades of experience in the financial world and is a true role model for resilience and innovation and leadership. Known for his empowering and dynamic leadership style, Simon has navigated teams through complex environments. And today we're thrilled to have the privilege of uncovering his leadership style, philosophy, and gaining insights, and also unpacking the strategies that have made him the esteemed leader that he is today. Welcome to the podcast, Simon. It's a pleasure to be speaking to you today.
Thank you.
I'm always intrigued by influential leaders, especially how to the level that you are. I'm sure you've gone through a number of challenges, obstacles in your life, but I want to take a step back and start from the beginning. Talk a bit about your childhood, your earlier days. If you can give us a bit of insight on where you grew up and did you always envision a career in finance?
So I grew up about an hour southwest of London, basically in the countryside. Lived in a big house, played in the garden, went to private school. And I guess nobody really envisages being in finance. But what's quite interesting is as I went through school, at some stage they do a careers test on you.
Mm-hmm.
And they said I would be in banking, which was quite weird. So what I did was my A-levels were actually Spanish, French and maths. And then, and I found that quite interesting because we read a lot, obviously. And then at university I did Spanish and French. And it was really a very academic course. It was essentially reading a book a week for 3 years. But in those days, it was a lot easier to get a job. And so really, the academic degree had nothing to do with what you actually ended up doing. You didn't have to do summer analysis, nothing like that. And your competition really was the best in the UK, not the best in the world. So although I went to a prestigious university, UCL in London, it's a lot more difficult nowadays. So how did I end up thinking about finance? I think what I thought was I like people and I like numbers, essentially. And so I looked at various parts of finance and then fell in love initially with dealing rooms, actually. Walking into a room and seeing clocks around the world. And in those days, a lot of people shouting and things like that. It was exciting. So that's what finance was for me.
So Simon, from the time that you started and now, I'm sure there's been a drastic and big change in technology. It's just how it's transformed. So especially in finance, how have you seen it change and how has it changed for you as well?
Well, funnily enough, I just saw a reel or a video, which was a Goldman Sachs recruitment video from 1985.
Okay.
And it really was very primitive. I mean, the telephones looked primitive, everything looked primitive. And so you're right. I mean, there was no email. Email came in the late 80s. And mobile phones came in, I can't remember, maybe in the 90s, because I remember doing a bond issue for a company called Orange. And the CEO, Hans Snook, as we went around the roadshow, he said everyone will have a mobile phone. And we went, no, you've got to be kidding. So I come from an era where, at school we used to queue up and put 2p coin in the meter. And then the beep 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 as the thing ran out. So yeah, I mean, obviously technology's changed a lot over the years.
What were some of the challenges that you must have faced or anything that strikes your mind on that?
Well, one of the most difficult things was, so I guess there was no such thing as a graduate recruitment program. So all that I did was I was on one desk, a syndicate desk, and then eventually I was on an order desk where I basically took orders from the branches of UBS in Switzerland. So I got to understand the bid offer and stuff like that. But almost immediately I went into sales, and then the pressure is on from the start. And I remember the head of syndicate going around the room and saying, how much of this new issue can you place? And part of the issue was he had a wandering eye, so you weren't even sure whether he was looking at you. But the pressure was on. You had to place millions and millions of bonds. And so you had to grow up pretty quickly. And you had to be an adult. You had to be able to sell. So I think I developed my skill in putting together an elevator pitch pretty early on and learning what worked and what didn't work.
And how was your transition from the UK to Hong Kong? I mean, I believe you've been here for almost 20 years or over 20 years.
No, it's only 13.
Wow.
I came here in 2010, but coming from the UK to here is very, very comfortable. Obviously, generally people speak English, which is great, and it is very easy. It's a very welcoming place because it's a transient sort of destination. People welcome you in and they welcome you out. So it's a very easy place to settle down. I mean, I found one of the, apart from work and obviously the expats at work, I also play field hockey and I joined a club and I met people virtually immediately. And in the absence of commuting, obviously you can either be very sociable or very active or both.
It's true. Hong Kong is a very dynamic place after all.
Yeah.
And how is the culture like from working in the UK and working in Hong Kong? What are the most drastic differences or similarities?
Uh, I mean, I think in finance people work very hard anyway. Um, I guess the things I really notice are small cultural things, like in Hong Kong, everybody goes out for lunch.
Mm.
And in the UK, they don't. They tend to sort of, in London, I mean, we're in Canary Wharf, you tend to sort of grab a sandwich, go back to the office, sit down at your desk. So there's definitely a cultural thing. And even strange things like in London, if I'm with a woman, I would let her go first, come in the door. But when I did that in Hong Kong, because I'm managing director, it sort of freaked people out because the senior person goes first. So you have to learn about the small intricacies of culture when you come here.
And anything about Asia that you specifically like or your favorite destination here?
Well, it's difficult to say what you don't like about Asia. I mean, the thing I absolutely love about Asia is that it's absolutely safe. At least the vast majority of it's very safe. So, and it's fun, and there's obviously a difference between the expensive countries and the cheap countries. So Hong Kong and Singapore are obviously very expensive. Japan used to be very expensive. I worked in Japan for a while when it was at its peak and very, very expensive. Now it's cheap, but obviously there's countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, all these sort of countries. And I think what unites people is actually food. I mean, everybody loves food. And what you learn, it reminds me a little bit of Friends. You know, when Joey has his own food, he's not going to share it. Whereas in Asia, you have the same size of dish. And therefore, the mission is to find a load of friends so you can have variety in what you eat. So this sort of bizarre logic, and round tables as opposed to square tables, and tables for 10 as opposed to equals to 2. So it's, to me, the culture is very much family, friends, eating out. The difference, I guess, is in Chinese culture, a lot of people, they drink with their meal, like Mao Tai and stuff like that, whereas, the Brits will go to the pub. So we separate our eating and drinking, or at least some of it.
And now moving towards a bit on leadership, I think
Yeah.
on LinkedIn you're specifically very active, and it's always good to see a leader, sharing their thoughts on LinkedIn and at least what you can share. I just want to just ask, is there a specific people, a group of people, or a specific influential leader that you have looked up to, and somebody that you like to follow advice from?
Well, there's two different things there. There's people I've actually worked with, and early on mentors of mine. So people maybe of my father's generation who I knew who were very helpful early on my career. Um, they were very, very useful. Some of the bosses I've worked for have been incredibly important, and I always think in life, what is so important is who your boss is, because essentially, if you have a good boss, you don't need to worry. You just get on with the job, and all the noise above you and all the politics just gets taken away. So I've been very, very lucky over the years to have some unbelievably good bosses. And then obviously there's people who I admire, who I might follow or read or look at on LinkedIn or just generally people who I admire.
And are there any specific leadership lessons that you picked up along the way in your journey that you now are passing on to the next generation?
Well, I think the main thing about leadership is making sure that everyone's all right, and I think I learnt a lot of that through playing sport, through teams, so that you realise that you you cannot succeed by yourself. You need everyone else. And I've been very privileged to work for some of the best teams in the world. So when I was in investment banking, I worked for a team at UBS that was just literally the best in the market. And now I'm very lucky at Citibank. The Hong Kong team is probably the most established private banking team in the world. So um, it doesn't matter the level of people, we just welcome in the more junior people and eventually some of the elder ones retire. But it's just incredible how strong the team is together. So to a certain extent, you don't really need leadership. The leadership is really the combination of the people in the team and the trust that there is. And that comes from long service, really. I mean, when we talk to people at Citi, it's like, how long have you been here? I mean, I've been Citi 20 years, some people 35. 10 is a sort of minimum, so that's what unites people.
And what advice would you give the younger generation, especially who's entering the workforce?
I think that young people, it's a very, very stressful time. I can see it in young people anywhere from once you realize that there's a world out there, so it might be 12 years old or something like that, all the way through to 30 seems incredibly stressful, what with hormones and worries about exams and pressure and peers and boyfriends, girlfriends, and trying to get your foot on the ladder is the most difficult thing. I always say to people, the most difficult thing is getting your foot on the career ladder. Once you're on that ladder, then you're fine. Mm-hmm. But obviously, it's very tough, and there can be economic cycles which go against you. So, but the main thing is not to worry and to actually try and relax, try and talk to people. I think it's very, very important, not bottle it up. I think COVID was incredibly difficult because people were doing university degrees by themselves, and they were under a lot of pressure, and just there was no way of letting out the pressure and everything else. So I think I always view that a 20-year-old is still a child, a 30-year-old is an adult. So I'm not quite sure where along the way you become an adult, but I think at some point you blossom, and I think the main thing is to love yourself and feel confident in yourself, and then that inner strength will be evident to the outside world.
There's a lot of chatter about multi-generational workforce now. What are your thoughts on that, especially that we are working with multiple different generations in a company?
Well, funnily enough, I ran the Generations Network at Citi. So Citi has, I can't remember, but that's about 7,000 people in Hong Kong. And it was fascinating actually trying to bridge the generations, because it's obviously easy to bridge the generation just below you, but to bridge all the way through. I think one of the main principles is that nobody is arrogant, everybody's available, everybody talks to everyone. And I think the buzzword that came around was sort of reverse mentoring, where essentially we went to young people and said, what can we learn from you, not the other way around. And I think brainstorming in that circumstance is incredibly interesting. But I think it broadens out. I mean, I think beyond that to gender, and then beyond that to sort of all sorts of stranger things like Cantonese speaking versus Mandarin speaking versus English speaking versus everything, so that trying to create an inclusive group. And the difficulty is that the way that companies are run is in silos. So the role of what I was doing with the Generations Network was to actually break down silos. And one of the most successful formats was meet after work, 6:15 registration, 6:30 somebody would talk for an hour, and then drinks afterwards. And often it's when people mingle afterwards that you get the feedback, oh, I met my boss's boss, never spoken to them before, really interesting person. And from both sides you get the positive feedback, and it's just because you create the environment in which people mix.
And just before we wrap up, having seen so much success in your life, is there a career moment or a fulfilling moment that made all of this worth it for you? All the hard work that you put in?
There's never one moment, and I think people don't realize that 40 years is a long, long, long time, and there's as many lows as highs. There's no straight line up, that's for sure. In fact, I was listening to an amazing speech by Steve Jobs to Stanford. It was absolutely incredible. But he said one of the most important points was when he was pushed out of Apple. And he actually, strangely, set up a couple of companies, including Pixar or whatever, and then was actually rehired by Apple. But he said that getting made redundant was actually the best thing for him because he became creative. So what I'm going to say is actually when I was the one time I was made redundant, which sounds really, really weird, but it prompted me to actually make a move I've been considering from investment banking to private banking. So once you get over the original shock and the actual fact that it's not your fault, just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time and everything else, it was an incredibly positive step for me. So I look back and I'm so glad I did it because the trend was moving against me and this was the opportunity, and the people I left behind actually suffered as everything became automated and investment banking became different and the whole environment became different. So I was very lucky about that. But otherwise, I mean, you know, there've been great moments, great trades, great people I've met. You know, you get awards and you think that's great, but I mean, after a while, it's not that there's tons of awards, but it just there's more sort of personal moments which make a difference as opposed to standing on a stage with some Oscar award, which often can be a substitute for being paid.
And my last question, I
Yeah.
always end on this note, is that if you were to win a lottery and money wasn't a factor, what would you do with your time?
I thought about this and I thought I'm not sure I'd want life to change because I think you talk about the lottery, but everybody I think in life has a number in their mind which they could retire on. And we aim towards that number. Sometimes that number keeps moving away from you for various reasons. Your expenses might go up or whatever. But I think after you, like myself, I've got grown-up kids. After a certain point, your expenses reduce and you actually think, okay, I'm pretty close to the number, but I would want to continue working. But I think the main thing is you actually then give back more than ever. And at first, when I started giving back, I thought, what's the point? You know, this life is a nil-sum game. But I think that giving back to people and trying to help people actually is hugely satisfying to yourself. So, and I think there's a wonderful American expression, send the elevator back down. I love that expression because, you know, you've been very lucky in life. You want to help people. And I think just a small thing you do for someone can change someone's life. And I think that's very profound. There's lots of people I've met through LinkedIn who I've helped just in a small way, but they, you know, they only remind me years later that, wow, I joined Citi because of you, or I did this because of you, or you said this. And at the time, you even forget you said anything. So for me, the important thing is just to be grateful for what you have. And to a certain extent, money's not an object. I don't need houses around the world, yachts and things like that. So, you know, it's more important to have a social circle and friends and everything else than have money.
I like that saying too, send the elevator back down.
Okay.
Thank you so much,
Okay.
Simon. It was a pleasure speaking to you. I hope you enjoyed this
I
conversation.
did. Thank you very much, Ria.
Thank you.